We are talking about race relations on today's show, and we can't go on talking about race relations without discussing white privilege. No one does that better than comedian Louis C.K.
I just want to say I'm not trying to say that if you're white, you can't complain.
Right.
I'm just saying that if you're black, you get to complain more.
Right.
You can't take people's, historical context away from them. And everybody wants this to. White people are always like, come on, it wasn't us. They want black people to forget everything. Every year, white people add 100 years to how long ago slavery was. I've heard educated white people say slavery was 400 years ago. No, it very wasn't. It was 140 years ago. That's two 70-year-old ladies living and dying back to back. And it's not like slavery ended and then everything has been amazing. It just...
Oh, I'm glad that's over.
Oh, yeah, it just ended like a clean where you don't have to wipe. Just boom. And then it's just been parades and presents ever since.
So I love that clip because he touched on so many different things there. And in the very beginning, he really talked about how there's this notion of reverse racism now. People will make that argument. And I do want to discuss that because I think that people who have that claim, might have some legitimacy in that claim. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I want to hear what you guys have to say. But Neal, I want to start off with you. And I want to get your thoughts on people belittling what the African American community has gone through and been through in the country, and this commentary from Louis C.K. about how some people think as soon as slavery ended, hey, we figured out race relations, things are cool. What do you think?
Well, yeah, but because white people don't know about, or it's not they don't talk about Jim Crow. Mm-hmm. They don't talk about. It was legally awful until 65?
Yes.
Voting Rights Act
right.
in 65. All right.
I'm glad we scrapped that, by the way.
Yeah. So, thank God.
Yeah.
So it was legally sanctioned awfulness until 1965. Mm-hmm. And then since then, it's been obviously desegregation, all that stuff, but it's most of it's in name only. Mm-hmm. There's still tons of segregation. There's still massive systemic problems that black people are just automatically the victims of, that white people don't even think about, ever.
You know what's incredible? Recently there was a story of this high school in Georgia that hadn't had a desegregated prom until very recently. Right. And it was because their prom was funded by private donors, and the private donors wanted to keep it segregated. Right. I mean, how do you hear stories like that and pretend as if hey, we've conquered it?
Denial.
Well, and it is, and I think a lot of people go, oh, it's down there. Mm-hmm. It's Georgia. It's Arkansas. It's it's that default. Oh, it's the South. But there's so much systemic racism.
Go to Chicago.
Go to Hollywood, California.
What?
Go to my industry. Go to it's everywhere. It's systemic. It's all part of that honest conversation that we're having about race. And I always have to point out, we as African Americans have to take responsibility too on thinking it was back then. The whole conversation about the use of the N-word. My biggest pet peeve is the random use of the word ghetto. Mm-hmm. Ghetto fabulous, ghetto fashion, what a ghetto attitude, used by both black, white, Latino, Asian. Ghetto is a particular word that has particular meaning behind the word. It's not a cool word.
Don't you feel like phrases like ghetto fabulous are pushed by the African American community, particularly in hip hop
community? Yeah, but in the same breath, we don't spend time talking about, do you know what the word ghetto means and how it started? It didn't start in the African American community. It started with regard to racism and bigotry within the Eastern European community. Right. And then it was brought to America.
When you look at the demographic that consumes hip hop, it's a very, very young demographic, and I just don't see teenagers sitting around and thinking about the ramifications of using the word ghetto.
And then it's our responsibility to sit down and go, wait just a minute, you're going to use this word? Let me tell you the history of this word and have a conversation about it.
And having that conversation, though, recognize that words actually can change meanings. They can mutate. We can struggle over their meaning. We can contest that meaning. And actually, we can build communities around words that once had a negative meaning. The N-word. I think people like Richard Pryor, Chappelle, the work you did with Chappelle, I mean, that he was brilliant at gaining insight into racism through comedy, through challenging stereotypes in a way that people hadn't thought about before.
But if you were walking down the street and a police officer or an average citizen said to you, hey, are we allowed to say it here?
Of course.
Say nigger, get off the street. There's no humor in that.
Oh, yeah.
There's no Richard Pryor making a joke
because
behind
there are different
me.
applications of the same word, right? But when Tupac says, how many brothers fell victim to the street, rest in peace, young nigga, there's a heaven for a G, he was using it as a term of solidarity,
But you have
endearment,
white
love.
kids. You have white kids mimicking it,
Yes,
not understanding what it
but then
means.
they have to be taught what the N-word can
But
do.
who's going to teach them?
But
Not
we
public
can,
school
we can.
system.
The N-word can gesture towards possibility, or it can drop a latch. Words are acts with consequences, and you can use them like tools for different purposes. That's just the way language
There's
works.
also a case to be made that there are white kids who got a lot of racial understanding from hip hop. I would counter that there are more white kids who use the N-word colloquially amongst their friends, usually white, that use it colloquially and in a friendly way more than white kids who use it as a racial
I
epithet.
completely disagree.
Okay, that's fine. I
understand where you're
you know what
coming from.
I'm not saying it's right,
Right.
but I'm saying like I believe that hip hop has done a lot of racial good. I know that in a lot of ways it was my entree into widening my point of view about racial issues. So that's the upside of what you're saying. It's also hugely, ultimately it is negative, but I would counter that there is that slightly positive. There is like a glimmer of.
I would say there's a lot of positive for the reason that you gave. Before hip hop, we were only talking about poor black males. Along comes hip hop, including gangster rap, and suddenly they start bringing their own perspective and speaking for themselves. And as you say, penetrating pop culture with that perspective for kids in the suburbs who get a little closer to that Compton block,
Okay, all right, but
listening
as
to
an African American woman, hip hop didn't elevate me. Hip hop denigrated me as a woman.
I'm not saying it's without
well, but I'm
problems.
sorry.
I'm not saying it's without problems.
I'm sorry. 51% of the population is female. So if we're going to talk about hip hop and we're going to talk about the level playing field that hip hop may have introduced, well, it left out women. And it was very negative, and it continues to be negative towards women. So I can't have this conversation unless we all get on board and said,
I believe that
say,
most of hip hop is politically embarrassing. But what I'm saying is there are certain positives, but none of them are for women.
Yeah,
Sorry.
White
people benefited. Sorry, ladies.
There's no art form that's not going to have its problems, and there are a lot of, even our
Yeah,
founders.
I'd like to talk about what romantic comedies have done to men. Go ahead.
Yeah.
That's a fair point.
It's a difficult issue. I'm not going to carry a brief for misogyny. I'm not going to carry a brief for homophobia. I am going to carry a brief for poor black males, 90% of whom in some inner city neighborhoods are in jail, on probation, on parole at some point in their lives, finding a forum where they can speak for themselves and penetrate through the miasma of lies about them and tell you their version of the truth.
I just didn't want this dialogue to continue without me interjecting the fact
Without
that
a woman
And I think that you definitely
ruining
made a good point.
the fun. We get it.